Okay, so on this episode, we are joined by Clifford Broadway. Clifford, I came across him recently after reading an article he wrote on the OneRing.net entitled Sex and Sensibility, Amazon's Nude Take on Tolkien. Published on October 6th, the article is a long consideration of what we might call the Latron Prime sex scandal. Or to be more fair, the news that Amazon has, number one, hired an intimacy coordinator for Lord of the Rings on Prime, and number two is apparently looking for actors who are comfortable with nudity for its upcoming series. While we gave our initial responses to this news on episode 212, I thought Clifford's article was a very thorough and balanced take on this news. So on this episode, we're going to talk to Clifford about his article, specifically what we actually know and what we don't, and the implications of what we actually know. So Clifford, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Hey, welcome.
Hello.
Is this the part where I barge in the front door because I saw that mark, that weird green mark that Gandalf scratched into the door?
Come on in. We'll open. You don't even have to barge in. We'll just open it right up for you. So.
Well, yeah. I'd like to get my big fat dwarf hands stuck in a jar of cookies. Have you got that? Have you got the jar of cookies for me, please?
I did not.
Oh, come on.
Cookies.
I spaced it.
Yeah.
Oh man, we're gonna have to do this another time, I guess. Give me time to get a cookie jar and some cookies in it.
So,
I'm ready.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad that you discovered me recently, and I appreciate being discovered again. This is what is so weird about it. I feel like a veteran of the OneRing.net, probably because I am. We started an all-volunteer community website a long time ago when we got word that in 1999, Daily Variety put out a full-page ad that was paid for by New Line Cinema, announcing that Peter Jackson and his team were going to begin principal photography down in New Zealand on a little story that is familiar to all of us. And that was when the OneRing.net was born. And we decided to make ourselves into a web portal where the message boards were free and there was no membership to pay. We didn't take ads or ad buys from studios, which was different. At the time, the largest buzzy news websites for geek journalism and geek entertainment online was the now defunct Ain't It Cool News, which, has had its fair share of scandals because of its proprietor and originator. But we've never had any scandals. We've just maintained this open door, open forum world of Tolkien. And the focus has always been writers, contributors. Some of them are published scholars who also took on a nickname. Everybody working on the OneRing.net, like myself, I use the nickname QuickBeam, and the founders used nicknames, and we all got together and made a web portal. So here we are, 20 years later, and we're still driving the conversation. After all of the Middle-earth films that Peter Jackson made, and after all the energy of the increase in book sales that came from the wild success of Peter Jackson's adaptation of Lord of the Rings, and to a much lesser degree, the Hobbit trilogy, we donated any extra money we had to the World Literacy Fund, and all of us, including myself, continue to stay up 16 hours overnight. Like that article that I just wrote was me staying up all afternoon, all night until 7 a.m., just letting all the words come out of my fingertips until I was able to articulate what I thought would be a good conversation kicker. And that's what we do as a collective group of fans. We have a place for people who are interested in the scholarly aspect, and people who are interested just in the pop culture aspect. And over my 20 years working for the OneRing.net, I produced and wrote the Ringers Lord of the Fans documentary, which won the audience award at Slam Dance and was picked up for distribution by Sony Pictures.
Wow.
So
cool.
after that 10-year license was done, And after Sony distributed our movie, the rights have come back to us.
Uh-huh.
And we have recently taken the film and we've, upgraded it from standard def to high def. And we've made some judicious trims and edited a couple of bits here. So we have a whole new version. It's not really a whole new version, but we have an improved, very much improved version. And we're about to make a new licensing deal with one of the big streaming platforms. And we've published a scholarship online with the Green Books. And that ended up being published in trade paperbacks. So we've hosted fan events, conventions, reading groups at all the major pop conventions, including New York, Chicago, San Diego Comic-Con, and so we do live events and we do online events, and we still do the same thing without making any money off of anybody, just a bunch of fans volunteering for the sake of Tolkien. And now I need to stop talking about all that because
that's so fascinating.
A lot. I'm sorry to say, but here we are talking about streaming platforms, and now we're back at the subject of what we're concerned about.
There you go.
Okay?
Come full circle. We appreciate you telling us all about the OneRing.net. So I've known of the OneRing.net for some time myself, and I'll say it's one of the first places I usually go if I want to get if I hear there might be news or something like that, right? I go and kind of check out what what the site has to say, but I really didn't know much about the background of the site at all. So that's really very fascinating to me.
Yeah, I didn't know it was all volunteer, to be completely
honest. It has been the whole time. When there was the Oscar parties that we threw was to allow the fans to come and experience a big black tie formal affair. And after they won their Oscars, they didn't go to the New Line Cinema after party. They didn't even go to the governor's ball. Peter Jackson wanted to do what Amazon Studios is not doing at all. And I mention this because it's a point of pride for me, because I was the master of ceremonies. Peter wanted to come out and acknowledge the fans. And he brought out every single person on his cast and crew. The only exception was Annie Lennox was not there that night. And neither was Cate Blanchett. They were the only two people who didn't come. But the relationship between fandom and how energized the fandom is, and the relationship between the filmmakers was never more clear than that night when they won their Oscars. They left all the publicists standing alone at New Line Cinema and didn't go there they wanted to come and talk to the fans who had supported them through all of those years of filmmaking in an isolated way. The outreach to fandom is part of what motivated me to write what I wrote. Yeah. Because Amazon Studios announced their project for this Second Age TV series over 3 years ago. And within that 3 years, they have not reached out to the fandom at all. Yeah. Not through any website, not through any organized publicity or PR effort, not even at any conventions. They have not reached out. And at the same time, back in 1999, the year 2000, New Line Cinema had hired a special person named Gordon Pattison, who worked as a liaison with all of the fans online and energized a very open door relationship between what the filmmakers were doing and what the fans were talking about. And it was a very healthy relationship that went on and on for many, many years. Yeah. We're not having that relationship now with Amazon Studios. So yeah, we can get now into the meat and potatoes if you guys want to.
Well, I mean, that's a great that's a great lead in, because I feel like, that tells us that there's a precedent for this healthy interaction and building this healthy relationship with the fans, right? Because as we've talked a lot about it over the years since the news first came out, you ask yourself, like, what if the author, if the person who created the thing is no longer around, then who do you kind of take your quality control from, right? Who do you go to for your quality control when it comes to an adaptation? And I mean, I think the answer, it can be different. There are different possible answers to that, but I think in the case of Tolkien, there's a case to be made, a very strong case to be made, that you have to listen to the fans. And I think we've seen some of the in other recent franchises, we've seen the perils of not listening to the fans and of not taking the interests of the fans very seriously. I think of Star Wars just right off the bat, and that's the one I feel like, especially when it comes to the sequel. And I don't know how you feel about that, but I think when it comes to the sequel trilogy of Star Wars, they didn't do a good enough job of appreciating, like, what are the fans who have been with this thing for their entire lives, who have loved this thing when we didn't even care about it. What do they actually think? What do they actually want to see, happen? And what are their biggest fears about how this could go wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And I think too that, Clifford, you mentioned just the wild success of the Peter Jackson movies. Like, they must, a large part of that had to be due to their willingness to listen to the fans and interact with them.
Mm-hmm.
They had their priorities. Say what you will about, everybody, all the fans have their little, qualms about this or that, but
we've done our reviews.
We've done our reviews.
Yeah.
But
Well, yeah, I'm still angry that Faramir dragged the hobbits all the way to Osgiliath, and
I am too.
I say it all the time, but that's just a crock. That's just a crock. I mean, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so yes, clearly we all have our issues, but still, they were wildly successful, and they listened to the fans. They had their priorities in line because they know. And I think you make this point in your article too about it's the fans that need to be listened to when it comes to this kind of thing.
Well,
because they're the ones that hold these stories, that know them, that hold them so dear, and to a large part, have been a huge influence on people's worldviews and things like that. So.
Well, I think there's an even, and to amplify that point even more, I think there's an even greater case to be made that it's of crucial importance with this project to listen very closely to the fans who have been with the lore, who know the lore inside and out, and can weigh in and provide you some cautionary kind of backup, right? And who know Tolkien's heart too, right? Like, or you got to be careful with that, but at the end of the day, like, who have spent time like reading his letters, getting to know the man, reading all of his non-fiction, and trying to understand the heart of the man a little more closely, so that you can better do that, because we're filling in a lot of blanks here. This isn't like you've got a book that you're trying to adapt. This is much more of a fill in the blanks kind of project.
Framework.
This is Tolkien Mad Libs in a way.
So. I like that. That's a good one. I'll have to remember that.
Well, Clifford, let's jump into your article. I mean,
thank you.
So,
I'll let you go ahead and start that. Please get right into it. I'm just pulling up something that I want to respond with that represents Professor Tolkien's thoughts, and it references Leaf by Niggle, one of his great short stories about the creative process, and it also references, I'll get to this later, it references Professor Tolkien's opinion on an invented conlang. And I'm sure people who are listening and watching probably already know what a conlang is, but a constructed language is the short term for that, and Professor Tolkien as a linguist, was very, very much involved in his world building based upon his linguistic interests. But I just want to have this handy. Please go ahead, John.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Can I ask a real quick question?
Speaking
hi.
Hi.
Speaking of fans, Tolkien fans, I'm just curious, you personally, how long you've been a fan of Tolkien, and kind of what got you kind of into his world per se?
The year was 1977, and I was all about going to see Star Wars in theaters at the age of 8, and I was all about the Rankin and Bass animated Hobbit, which was a telefilm broadcast on an American broadcast network. Back then, we only had 3, and that's where it started. My older brother, got his hands on this beautiful, large illustrated edition of The Hobbit, and all I could do was ravenously read that book every time that my brother would put it down. And I was, jockeying, you know,
Mm-hmm.
as you know, we were only 2.5 years apart. My brother and I were jockeying for possession of the books.
Yes,
Like,
I love
you know,
that.
I couldn't read the Doctor Strange comics fast enough after he put them down. You
Yeah.
know
Mm-hmm.
how it is.
Mm-hmm.
So it all began with Rankin and Bass,
Gotcha. Okay.
much in the same way that Ralph Bakshi inspired Peter Jackson to pick up Lord of the Rings,
Mm-hmm.
because his film was released 1 year later in '78.
Right.
So you had the double whammy. In the late '70s, it was the Rankin and Bass Hobbit, my brother and I having this competitive appetite for reading together.
Mm-hmm.
There's something to that. There's something that we can talk about later about how very young children get encouraged to read like that at that age.
Mm-hmm.
And Professor Tolkien does that to a greater degree than a lot of other modern fantasy authors. You know, we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
thank you for asking. That is how it started. It's a correlation of popular culture influencing itself in a weird way. If it hadn't have been for the telefilm from Rankin and Bass and our undying affection of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and all that other stuff that they were doing, then, you know, who knows whether my brother and I would have been reading other books instead, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's interesting. Very
yeah.
cool.
Absolutely.
All right. So it's been almost a lifelong love for you. I mean, starting
Yes.
back then. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
and in the late '90s, when I moved to Los Angeles, I was working for Ian McKellen for his website
Oh,
McKellen.com,
Mm-hmm.
and this was
cool.
way before he was cast as Magneto, and
Yeah.
before he was working as Gandalf.
Sure.
And my work with the website was we were working around the Oscar campaign for Gods and Monsters,
Mm-hmm.
where he was up for his leading actor nomination. Um, and Vanessa Redgrave won Best Supporting Actress, I believe. But that was a film directed by Bill Condon, who would go on to work with Ian McKellen in The Good Liar, more recently with Helen Mirren, and other films they worked on together, I think, I forget. But anyways, there was a time when I was working for Ian McKellen's website, and the people at theonering.net came up to me and said, "We're looking for new writers to contribute." And
Sure.
I said, "Well, not only can I contribute all this Tolkien ephemera, which is floating in my head
Yeah.
as a writer, but I can also siphon off secrets." And
Mm.
Ian was very good about giving me secrets. And then I got to pass them off to the fans.
Yes.
So, and
Cool.
hey, I don't think New Line Cinema is going to do anything about that non-disclosure agreement now. So I can say this now.
Hopefully not.
I'll just let you know. Sorry, New Line, but Ian McKellen broke his NDA left and right.
Oh,
And
no.
I helped, okay? Just so you guys know. So,
That's
but
great.
that's where it all started.
Very
It is
cool.
funny that a lifelong passion can sometimes take you into directions you never thought you'd go.
For
When I
sure.
was a little boy, I didn't think that I would be. I thought I'd go to veterinarian school and I'd be a veterinarian.
Mm.
And then something else happened, and I ended up becoming a writer. I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
I don't know how that
That's
happened,
how
but
it goes
whatever.
sometimes. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
That's really cool though. I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The relationship with Tolkien begins young for a lot of people.
Mm.
And let's talk about, for just 1 second, if Amazon Studios makes this TV show, which is a $1 billion mega approach to this,
Mm-hmm.
then they're going to be the new representation of Tolkien in mass media.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, they have a different responsibility than some fans making a fan film in the backwoods of Griffith Park.
Right.
You know,
Absolutely.
this is different. So, and that is why I was motivated to write this, because we're talking about stewardship of the franchise,
Yeah.
and we're talking
Absolutely.
about the way that generations of people will approach it.
Mhm.
Now, in the future, every mom and dad would feel comfortable putting in the Blu-ray of a Lord of the Rings film to show to their little ones.
Yeah.
But if Amazon Studios wants to get frisky and make a whole different approach, if they want to make something that is more quote unquote dialed in to a mature audience that has a different appetite for Tolkien, that okay, well then you are going to forfeit that valuable thing of generational connectivity.
Yep.
Because
Absolutely.
you might end up making a series that not every parent would want to put in on Thanksgiving afternoon for the whole family to watch together while the bird is still in the oven.
No,
You know,
you're absolutely right. I hadn't even
you
thought of
guys.
that. Yeah,
No,
but you're absolutely right.
You got that right.
Yeah.
So, you know, let's start off and ask ourselves, okay, Clifford, what do we actually know right now on this issue, right? So a couple of weeks ago, there was kind of a lot of info floating around on the internet about, you know, there's probably some sensationalistic headlines about, you know, Amazon will have sex in Lord of the Rings or something like that. So it's important that we start off by asking ourselves, like, what do we actually know about the situation?
Well, we don't know for sure, but I'm hearing rumors about what's in the scripts. And we know definitely, we'll start with the concrete, we know that they have hired an intimacy coordinator, and we know that they've put out casting calls for some type of nudity. Now, in and of itself, all things being equal, that's a good thing that they have hired an intimacy coordinator, because somebody should be, a professional should be on set, because you're dealing with actors and actresses who have to go into the job creating stuff that is written for them on the page. And those actors and actresses may or may not have some kind of personal trauma in their background. We don't know, but professionally, they have to galvanize themselves against whatever happened in their past and get the job done. And an intimacy coordinator should be there professionally to make sure that the wrong people are not poking around on set, that, creepy people are not looking, that shouldn't be looking and shouldn't be there, and that there's a psychological and emotional balance for the actors and the director to work with each other holistically. This all makes sense, okay?
Sure.
Yeah.
If it were any other given TV show, I would say I understand that.
Yeah.
But then again, what type of intimacy is, well, it could be kissing, it could be fondling, it could be, walking around naked from point A to point B to arrive at the bathtub. There was not an intimacy coordinator on The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, because in that nude scene where all the dwarves are having a bath in the Rivendell fountain, they were all CGI. Those were CGI dwarves snapping towels at each other on their bare bottoms. Okay. So there's no intimacy coordinator needed. So we know that's the fact. We know they put out the casting announcement and they hired an individual. Beyond that, we do not know the content of the scripts, or whether the nude scene requires X, Y, or Z. It might be something very simple. It might be a more staged, carefully choreographed theme. And that's where an intimacy coordinator also has to make sure that the actors are comfortable with the prosthetics that they have to wear, because they have to wear a shield piece that shields their body parts from each other, but also looks natural skin tone on camera and is not a giveaway. And they also have to be comfortable with the choreography, and they have to make sure that the director does not ever change the agreed upon choreography of what the sex scene is supposed to have. And you know what? I applaud having these types of
that sounds like very, very sensitive kind of proceedings, and especially with with everything that's happened in the last few years and kind of Hollywood with the especially Hollywood with the Me Too movement. You kind of understand like the importance of if you're going to be doing anything that involves any kind of risk to a person with this sort, then you want to have a professional there to to make sure everything's going just how it should be.
And the studio's policies are all now part of this. And I can also imagine that you can't get a good insurance policy unless you have the right people on. And that includes the fire marshal, safety checks, the electricians who make sure the cables are not getting wet, and an intimacy coordinator. This might also be part of getting the proper insurance to get the production able to film. I'm not sure what the laws are, but we also know that New Zealand has managed, surprisingly, they have managed to keep COVID down to such a degree that they have the largest and busiest commercial production on Earth currently filming major production, all in New Zealand. And there's no other, there are other countries that are doing much smaller scale, but Amazon is able to take advantage of the fact that there's some beautiful locations in New Zealand. There's lots of talented craftspeople there, but also the COVID infections are down far enough that they can get that engine running. So we also know that's a fact.
Okay, that's great.
In the rumor department, I am hearing rumors that the Tolkien scholar that they had said that they had hired to bring on board, Tom Shippey, was only brought on board to do the map. And that map was a small piece of publicity material that Amazon offered a long time ago. And they haven't offered anything since then. So
that's so frustrating, because I remember when the news first came out that Tom Shippey was going to be a part of the production. I think Tolkien fans everywhere
rejoiced,
like breathed this huge sigh of relief, because it's like, oh, Tom Shippey is like, he's going to make sure everything's done right. He's not going to let any funny business go on that we're afraid of, right? He's going to make sure the tone's right. He's going to make sure the scripts don't go off the rails in terms of the lore. We can
quality control.
We can trust this. We can trust this if Tom Shippey's involved.
Well, he spoke to a German podcast, and that pissed them off, and they got rid of him, is what I've heard. Forgive me for just being blunt about this, but I heard that because he went and spoke in very general, very, very generalistic terms to a German podcast, that got out. And then I heard from the inside that Amazon Studios took, Tom Shippey out of the thing entirely and told him he'd never work in this business again. Quote, like, you'll never work in this town again type of thing. And you can put that under very weird rumors. I don't know if that's true or not, but it doesn't look good, because it tells the fans that there is not another person there who has the oversight,
right?
Who is the central person. When I was watching Peter Jackson being interviewed by Charlie Rose from years and years and years ago, and he spoke so emphatically about how deliberate Professor Tolkien was in his approach to creating these stories, and what Peter's intentions were in making The Lord of the Rings. And this old interview was very, very revealing, because Peter made it very clear that they didn't want to supersede what they knew Professor Tolkien's wishes really were. And they always wanted to make deference to Professor Tolkien, and that's why they hired Philippa. Philippa was a playwright and a very successful writer who was the deepest, dyed-in-the-wool, hardcore Ringer fan that Peter and Fran could hire. And so 3'6", that was the production name they were using. 3'6" brought Philippa in, and several Academy Awards later and 6 films later, I think we know that they made the right decision. We have no awareness that J.D. Payne or Patrick McKay or any of the team they've hired at Amazon Studios are at that same level, where there's a guiding, pivotal person who can. We don't know that they have anyone there doing that. Keeping in mind that Mr. Payne and Mr. McKay were famous in Hollywood for an unproduced Star Trek script. And that was their calling card. An unproduced Star Trek script.
Yeah,
that's it.
And I remember reading that and being like, well, I guess they must be pretty great, if they got this gig with not really having much on their resume. They must be something. They really must see something in these guys, but maybe that's the wrong assessment. I don't know.
We'll see.
I don't want to prejudge or anything like that, but I think to get back to the Tom Shippey point, this scenario that you just described doesn't set any of us at ease. I think, it gets any Tolkien fans hackles up. Just real quick, for those who might not be super aware of who Tom Shippey is and why we're speaking of him in such glowing terms, can you maybe give a brief background on him?
As a matter of fact, I'm going to go grab a copy of his book off my bookshelf. Give me 2
I thought you were going
seconds.
to say I'm going to go grab Tommy's, right?
Wouldn't that have been amazing?
That would have been pretty awesome. I feel like that's what we're going to get with Clifford is like the more we talk to him, we're just going to be like, oh, hey, here's this thing that you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
He is the author of this book.
Okay.
He is incredibly, incredibly erudite. He wrote The Road to Middle-earth. He
Mhm.
taught at Oxford. Tom Shippey overlapped chronologically with Professor Tolkien, teaching the same syllabus at Oxford, which
Wow.
gave him intimate familiarity with the poems and languages that were a primary stimulus to Tolkien's imagination. He subsequently held the chair of English language and medieval literature at Leeds University, which was the same chair that Tolkien held early in his career.
Wow.
Tom Shippey, you guys, if you don't have a copy of this, I'm telling you fans everywhere, this is a wonderful, wonderful book, author of the century. And I can tell you from at least a couple of convention nights that Tom Shippey and I shared together, he's a damn good karaoke singer as well.
Very important.
Wow.
Very important.
So you can get a small list of Tolkien scholars who are related to the Tolkien Society in England, and you can also get some whose authorship is a non-compare. And more recently, I did a great interview with the guy who wrote Tolkien and the Great War, which was the foundation of the Fox Searchlight biography film Tolkien, which
Right.
which was directed by Dome Korakovsky. And what an elegant and lovely film that is. So yeah, you wanna talk about Tom Shippey and what he could have brought to the whole thing. Yeah, he would have been.
Sounds like
he would have been the person who said, "You can't have those characters show up right now. They don't appear until thousands of years later.
Right.
You cannot have this military action from Sauron happen here because it happens thousands of years before.
Right.
You can't crisscross these exigencies. You cannot play fast and loose with them." And that would have been his job if Tom Shippey had been there in that position, which is what the Tolkien fans wanted him to do.
Well, and the truth is that even though we're dealing with the Second Age, where the lore, it's the least of the three Middle Earth ages, it's the least rounded out in terms of the lore. But don't be fooled, because Tolkien, once you start diving in, you realize, whoa, there's a lot more here. There's a lot more detail that he already decided on than we realize, right? Like just a Calabath, you get it, and then of the Rings of Power in the Third Age actually talks about like, the creation of the rings, which happened in the Second Age, right? The Rings of Power. You get into the timetables and the Second Age, and then you just got all the detail that's cast throughout Lord of the Rings itself, right? All the little details, the little one-off things that people might say here or there that indicate like, oh, that's actually significant, and that actually clarifies that this particular event happened at this time rather than this time.
For example, you could not have Sauron taken captive by the King of Numenor. If it was a piece of the story you wanted to do, you could not do it on a TV show and have the forging of the rings happen afterwards.
Right.
It has to happen this way: the forging of the rings and the war of elves versus Sauron and the destruction of Eregion and the death of Celebrimbor. All of that has to happen first before Ar-Pharazôn shows up and takes, Anatar / Sauron prisoner. So you cannot play fast and loose with this, with these things. This is as basic as it gets to me. And the man's name was John Garth, the gentleman who I interviewed earlier.
Yes.
John Garth. So, if they don't have a John Garth or a Tom Shippey or somebody there on with or a Philippa Boyens, then we don't know who is in the writer's room telling the people who are writing what is acceptable or not acceptable.
Well,
we really don't know.
And it kind of comes down to an interest too, or a question too, of like the interest, because one of the individuals you mentioned in addition to Tom Shippey is Brian Cogman, I believe is his name, and he
Mm-hmm.
worked on Game of Thrones, which I know
Mm-hmm.
is we'll probably talk about here here a little more in a moment. But his name was thrown up there a little bit as somebody who maybe knows a lot about the lore. And he was kind of he was maybe somewhat of a lore guy on the Game of Thrones production. And
Oh yes,
but
he
but but
was.
the question is, like, who does he represent, right? And who do what interest does he represent? At the end of the day, is is he representing the interest of Amazon and Jeff Bezos at all, or is he representing the actual interest of Tolkiendom, right? Of the Tolkien fans out there, and the Tolkien Society and the Tolkien estate, all those things. And with Tom Shippey, you felt like he was that guy that represented us. With that now, yeah, and I'm not sure who Brian Cogman represents, but it sounds like he was just a guy they brought on from HBO, Game of Thrones.
I had in the past couple of years, maybe this was 3 years ago. I read this massive article. It was in the Atlantic. Maybe it was in Vanity Fair, and it was a big discussion about Brian Cogman being the third head of the three-headed dragon of David Benioff, D.B. Weiss, and Mr. Cogman himself being the third head of the dragon in terms of where the adaptation of Game of Thrones went and major story decisions and the whole direction of where everything went was because Benioff and Weiss needed him. They needed Cogman, and he came in with all the lore, and he was the equivalent of a Philippa Boyens to exactly what Fran and Peter had. They pulled in Philippa. So David Benioff and D.B. Weiss pulled in Cogman, and he became that guy. He was that guy.
On
And
Game of Thrones, right?
Yeah, on Game of Thrones.
Yeah, okay.
And it's also why there's still such controversy around Cogman writing, sexual assault scenes for the character Sansa Stark that were not in the books, that, the original. And George R.R. Martin, who's still with us, was allowed to come in and write one full script of one episode almost every season. So he himself was involved, and Martin was there. So it's interesting that Tolkien is nowhere near around. Tom Shippey is out, and we really don't know. We really are left struggling with speculation about what Amazon is doing there, and that goes back to my earlier point of why don't they reach out to the fans and liaise? Why wouldn't Amazon Studios realize this is $1 billion investment? Why don't we liaise with the fandom and actually have more dialogue with them about their expectations? You'd think that this is, but then again,
you'd think.
You'd think.
Let's look at the question, the substantive question here a little closer. I think you do a really good job of dealing with this in your article. So, really what we're getting down to is, I think the fear that so many Tolkien fans have right now is that this show is going to turn into Game of Thrones and Middle Earth, right? And Game of Thrones, I think, even if people haven't seen it, I'm sure a lot have. Greta and I have actually, I've seen one episode, and honestly, it just wasn't my thing. I could see the fantasy. I enjoyed the fantasy aspect of it, but it got so brutally gruesome, and I don't think there was any sex in that particular episode, but it just got so brutally gruesome in terms of just the detail of the gore and everything, and whatever murder was happening in that episode, that I was just like, I don't know, want to watch this anytime soon. But like, I think we're all afraid as Tolkien fans that this is going to turn into maybe partly, and on one hand, maybe a gore fest, but then now we're like, oh gosh, is this going to turn into this like extremely sexualized television show that takes place in Middle Earth,
like Game of Thrones meets Outlander, like that kind of thing. But I mean, I want to make clear, and I think you did a great job, Clifford, of mentioning this in your article, that you're not advocating for like a G or even a PG-13 rated series here, because let's be honest, like there's plenty of uncomfortable things in the Silmarillion. I mean, human sacrifice, idol worship, like, I mean, you mentioned like tearing beating hearts out of chests. Like, that's fair game, because I mean, that's
you've got full on human sacrifice in the last last century or so of Numenor's existence.
Yeah, I mean, it was not all rose petals and chocolates, for sure.
Yeah.
No, it was a little bit more like Apocalypto.
Yeah, right, exactly. But there's still limits, right? I mean, there are certain things and there's certain places that Tolkien just did not go and refused to go, and I think that's where that's where the concern lies.
And you talk some about how Tolkien might have presented this kind of content himself, how he might have wanted it presented.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Greta, for that insight. I appreciate that. The thing about and I'm not at a loss for words usually when it comes to talking about my passion for Tolkien, but I'm at a loss for words if somebody does not understand the idiomatic expression that he worked so hard to perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go now into this letter that I wanted to pull up from earlier. And this was a letter written to me by a Tolkien linguist and scholar of languages who wrote this to me in response to my article. And he says, the fact is, and this should have been clear much earlier, the Amazon project is exactly what we most feared from the outset. A cynical way of cashing in on the built-in Tolkien audience, which is now immense due to Jackson's success.
Mm-hmm.
With the work of, let's say, only a casual relationship to any actual words written by Tolkien. The first clue is that they've been calling this show Lord of the Rings, which it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
I do not think they will care much more about what fans think, because fans are always griping about stuff. Oddly, Tolkien's comment about Professor Jesperson's invented language, Novial, and there was a constructed language called Novial, which compares to Esperanto. Tolkien said that this invented language that he was observing and studying from Professor Jesperson, it was, quote, ingenious and easier than Esperanto, but it is hideous. Tolkien described it as, ingenious, easier than Esperanto, but it's hideous.
Right.
And here's why. He says, quote unquote, factory product is written all over it, or rather, made of spare parts. Made of spare parts. And it has no gleam of individuality, coherence, and beauty, which appear in the great natural idioms. Yeah. So if Professor Tolkien can talk about how he can appreciate the ingenious effort behind your invented language, but he can also call you out on the problems with it.
Right.
And this seems very applicable to Amazon's approach to the show that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll read on. He says, perhaps it's a better metaphor as the fate of Niggle's painting in Tolkien's famous piece, Leaf by Niggle. Quote, that large one, the way they used to patch the damaged house next door after the gales and the floods, just a source of raw material for some other construction for a practical purpose, like making money for Amazon. Or perhaps Tolkien's metaphor for the way academics used to treat Beowulf before Tolkien, as an interesting curio of history rather than a magnificent work on its own right.
Yeah.
So, and then he goes on and quotes Tolkien, defending Beowulf and its treatment. I mean, there are very thoughtful responses coming from other people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about our appetite for popular culture, which is what Amazon seems to think that it is. Maybe they're doing data collection and it's telling them, oh, well, look at the purchasing items that they're buying and look at what customers are clicking on. So they're collecting all this data, and maybe they're getting the wrong impression about what we want from Tolkien. And I think it's safe to say that if Professor Tolkien, in his endless linguistic efforts to make his story a unique idiom, an idiom of high fantasy, and if you can't bear that in mind when you're making $1 billion adaptation of him, then you might not deserve to be the people making $1 billion adaptation of him. That's really the point I wanted to make.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not a prude. I am certainly not a prude. I can appreciate, all kinds of entertainment. I can appreciate all different levels of sexual energy, like in The Witcher, where it's presented as very playful and kind of offbeat and silly, but there's nothing threatening about it.
Right.
You know, the relationship with George R.R. Martin and sexual expression is about dehumanizing people, and I don't know why, but and I've interviewed Mr. Martin a few times. He's interested in exploring these factors that dehumanize people in a fantasy setting. But Tolkien was not interested in exploring that. He was interested in finding out what brings people together in the toughest moments of despair, when they realize they can win over despair.
Yes.
And there may be other dehumanizing things happening, but they're always on the side of the corrupted villains. It's not good people amongst themselves, except for, you know, Boromir's struggle, and more specifically in the Silmarillion, Feanor and the oath of his sons brings the greatest grief and tragedy, and that is where they dehumanize themselves by their oath to their father's mindless craze about regaining the Silmarils, and that's all interesting to explore. But you don't ever see Tolkien using sexual expression as a way to hurt or demean or demoralize people. He wrote a lot in Morgoth's Ring, where he writes about in the peoples and the history of Middle Earth, where I've been reading my notes recently about Tolkien's concept of sexual congress between the Eldar, and the way Tolkien writes it, it was a metaphysical. You can read how they bake bread, how they structure societies, how they arranged marriages, how the elves live their lives, and there's a lot of stuff in the history of Middle Earth about how the Eldar lived and ordered their day-to-day lives. And Professor Tolkien talks about the begetting. He never calls it intercourse. He calls it the begetting. The begetting of children. And when you read those notes, it becomes very clear that the elves gave their spirit, their fea, their energy into the act, and it became so distressful, sometimes tiresome, that they didn't have that much sexual congress that much, because it was so metaphysically exhausting.
Wow.
And that leads to the conversation of how Feanor's mother died during childbirth, because she gave so much of her soul and her metaphysical aspect to her baby, and she died when Feanor was born. So Tolkien does, he does talk about sexual congress between the elves, but he talks about it in a deeply metaphysical way, and how it affected their marriage constructs and their domestic lives.
Sure.
He never presents it in a way like, I tied somebody to the rack, and I chopped off his junk, and I fed it to the dogs.
Right.
Which is where you're at with that's Game of Thrones. That's where that's at.
Exactly.
And yeah, I mean, so it's not like Tolkien wouldn't have, like, it's not like Tolkien was just like, la 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 la, there's no such thing as sex, as he's like writing these works. But it was not, it was not the primary focus. I just have to say real quick, what you said about Lord of the Rings and what it's about, that may be the best like short summation of like what the Lord of the Rings is about that I've ever heard, right? The way that people can come together and overcome the darkness and the despair of their situation, together. That was really beautiful. I want to say, I really love this part of your article where you say, notice how Tolkien describes his connected legendarium with words like large and cosmogonic, splendor, elusive beauty, majestic, steeped in poetry, and the most revealing of all, high, purged of the gross. He never uses words like scatological, salacious, sexually charged, tumescent, steeped in carnality, or debauched. If you are even slightly attuned to Tolkien's stories, you know the tone he set. You know the point I'm driving at. I don't even feel like being subtle anymore. I think that's where we're all at. We're just like Amazon.
Well,
what the hell? Please.
The joke is the joke to me is that I wasn't being subtle at all the whole time.
Right.
I'm sorry. That was me being very self-indulgent, because I wasn't being subtle at all. I'm sorry. But you know what? And you know what? tumescent is one of my favorite words. That's a good word. It's a naughty word, but it's not that naughty. It's something that John Oliver might say just to make you guys giggle a little bit. Oh, it's tumescent, like a water balloon or something. What are you talking about? but the joke is, and I was telling people this on my live stream show on Tuesday, that you can appreciate Tolkien because you know what you're getting. You know what you're getting every time. And if it's going to be a high romantic fantasy, it's going to be written and it's going to be presented in a way where the author can keep your focus on the themes, on the power of the narrative, on the power of the language. And that's all that Tolkien wanted to do, was give his languages a historic place to live and thrive. He wasn't interested in exploring, the other things, and that's totally okay. Other fantasy writers, especially modern ones, Patrick Rothfuss, I just butchered his name, Rothfuss, and Jordan, and Martin, and all these other fantasy writers, they can get away with doing whatever they want to do, but they've all come from that space of, whoa, Tolkien's idiom, that high fantasy idiom, let's start with that.
Yeah.
That's like the pinnacle. And then let's rework it from there.
Right.
And that there's still a reason why Tolkien is that pinnacle of that standard of high fantasy. And what is that reason? Okay. Do you know how much Peter Jackson would have turned off the fans if he had done some of the things that we're suspicious of right now? But go back and look at those old interviews with Peter Jackson talking to Charlie Rose. He talks about the history of languages and how important it is to him. And I wish that we were getting some interviews with J.A. Bayona, who is directing the pilot 2 episodes.
Right.
I wish that anybody from J.D. Payne or Patrick McKay, they're the showrunners. It would be wonderful if the showrunners just want to come out and say, hey, we're going to bounce some questions off the fans. We'll talk to fans and we'll receive some internet.
Say anything for that matter. I mean, I don't feel like we've heard anything from them.
Well, we haven't.
Do you know how powerful is that when Reddit does an AMA, then people come together and then it becomes a massive publicity thing? It would be a good thing.
Absolutely.
For their studios, it'd be great publicity to be like, oh yeah, and it's just it's not happening. So we're left to struggle and guess. We're left with guesswork.
We can understand, I think, as fans, like that they, there's many things that they want to maybe unleash the substance of the show on us as a surprise, right? And kind of build up the anticipation. But I mean, they're not even throwing us a bone here. They're not throwing us anything to work with. We're completely in the dark. And so when we get news like, when we get anything we get becomes headline news for Tolkien fans, right? They hired an intimacy coordinator. Well, what does that mean? Well, the only other thing we know right now is that they're looking for actors who are comfortable with nudity. Therefore, they must be getting ready to turn this thing into Game of Thrones and Middle Earth, right? Oh my gosh, they're going to ruin it. They're going to ruin Middle Earth, right?
I heard a rumor that the Galadriel character is going to be, quote, in and out of several relationships before she settles in with Celeborn. And I'm thinking to myself,
oh no.
I hope people on the podcast heard me slap my own face. Just like that. This is why I closed my article with that sentence. If you don't want your Lord of the Rings show to be The Witcher meets Riverdale, then we better talk about this now, okay? Because we don't need to see, like a Stranger Things approach to Tolkien. It's like teenagers struggling with sexual expression.
Right.
I don't remember anything in Tolkien stories where, quote unquote, a 6,000-year-old elf, because at that point Galadriel would be how many thousands of years old, is being, you cannot treat these characters like, the other idiomatic storytelling that is popular but that's what they're looking at. They're looking at what is popular on streaming platforms.
Yeah.
And even something as worthy and wonderful as the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance was not given another chance. It was the most wholesome thing that Netflix had. And instead of keeping that on the air, that won the award, it won the Emmy Award against all odds. They would rather keep on other controversial stuff instead of putting on the stuff that the fans are ready to embrace. And I mention that because Amazon Studios cannot treat Tolkien like it's one and done. They can't just do one season and then abandon it and not ever
into 5 seasons, right?
I hate being all nervous, but my nerves are starting to show a little bit. I hate to be a nervous person, but some people can do it right. Yeah, Ralph Bakshi did it right, and I'm glad I mentioned him because he's notorious for having TNA in all movies and a lot of other things too. And he made an X-rated film that was very, very, very popular and made him a lot of money. Now, Fritz the Cat is not a pornographic film, but it is an X-rated film. But you give a man who makes Fritz the Cat, and you give him Lord of the Rings, and he ends up staying in his lane the whole time. And if Ralph Bakshi can, of all people, if he can keep to the idiom, the powerful, high fantasy idiom that Tolkien stayed in, not go astray, then other people who are producing a much larger effort right now, they can also stay in the lane of not muck about with it. That was my overall point with that.
Yeah, staying in lanes. And like we said before, there's not that, there's anything like, there's hideous stuff in the Silmarillion, right? I mean, there's hideous things in Tolkien, but they're always on the side of the bad guys, right? It's the orcs, and it's the, it's the Nazgul, and it's Sauron and Saruman. Like, it's the bad guys that are doing that stuff, and and I think, you said it. I love that quote you pulled from his letter about, high with, what was it? It was something about high with the gross,
purged of the
gross purged, and I mean, gross is obviously a relative term, but we know what he's saying, right? And I'm afraid that Amazon is wanting to include some of, or an indecent amount of that gross to appeal to who knows who. I mean, not the fans, obviously.
It literally, you bring out this, you have a snippet of a article, I think it's from Variety. I think you mentioned that, where it says Jeff Bezos mandates programming shift at Amazon Studios, and this is from back, I think, before the announcement about them purchasing it. I think it was actually like a month before the news came out, or a month or two. And it says the mandate from Jeff Bezos is clear: bring me Game of Thrones. And you can just, you hate to think this, but you're just like, you can just see this happen. It's almost like it's in some kind of like satirical film, right? It's like, big corporate, powerful corporate CEO comes out and says, I want this, and all the underlings scramble, and they're like, get it, let's get it, we got to make it happen. And that's the whole thing. They can't think about anything else, right, except making their own Game of Thrones, because the boss said it, and he can crush my career, right?
It's the Lex Luthor. It's the Lex Luthor metaphor,
right?
I mean, this is it does read like comic book villain type of motivational behavior.
It's just like you guys need to come and talk to us and tell us, make us, like, tell us it's not true, like, make us feel better, make us know that you're confident, you know what you're doing, that you appreciate Tolkien and that his uniqueness, right? And because otherwise this all looks like it's playing out in a really like cynical fashion.
Well, let's talk about, we know that they're not going to do all of the Silmarillion, but we've got a suspicion that they licensed that later chunk of the Silmarillion, which includes the Akalabath, and it includes the stuff relative to the Second Age. And I think the only support we have for that suspicion is looking at the Instagram postings of all their actors and actresses because they keep showing the front cover of the Silmarillion, which is the only thing we see in terms of a copy of a physical book. And that is a clue that has been allowed. All the actors and actresses keep saying, oh, look, I'm doing some quarantine reading. And they're not showing unfinished tales.
Right.
They're showing Silmarillion.
Yeah.
So that's the other hint we have, that maybe they licensed material outside of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, which was included in their original license for the property. But maybe for the first time ever, pieces of the Silmarillion book have been licensed. And we have to go with that because of the Numenor presence on the map.
Mm-hmm.
We do have to go a little bit further with that assumption.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and just on that note, maybe they probably do need their, even if they haven't licensed it, they need to get their hands on Unfinished Tales and, at least read The Mariner's Wife, because that's the only actual story we have from the second, like the actual full story we have from the Second Age. And at least it'll give you a flavor of what, even though it was early in Numenor's history, it'll give you a flavor of what the people were like,
Yeah. And here's the thing with that story, there's plenty of romance, there's plenty of drama. There's plenty of, some insinuated inappropriateness, but it's always insinuated. Like it's never, spelled out. It's always between the lines. And, to kind of take that story and say, oh, here is our reason for, sexifying Tolkien. That's completely unfounded. Completely.
Yeah. So, Clifford, so I want to read this. This is toward the end of your article. You say, my personal take, what fans want most from any Tolkien adaptation is verisimilitude, something that carries the true spirit of Tolkien and has integrity in realizing it.
Mm-hmm.
Amazon showrunners can keep that integrity by staying true to the themes and characters and intent of the author. It is not impossible to guess Tolkien's intentions when they are so plainly available to us, even though he is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Fidelity to Tolkien is a hashtag we have endeavored to use. Not perfect, but it's a decent axiom to bear in mind.
Mm-hmm.
That just sums, I think it sums it all very well for what we are certainly feeling. And I'm sure, I know that so many Tolkien fans are feeling about this. I've heard from some people, since we reacted last week, I've heard from some of our listeners that they've almost tried to console me. They're like, at least we'll always have the books. And so there's some people I feel like out there who
they've
are just already resigned
like
themselves that Amazon is going to screw this thing up, right? And so I guess my question then is there anything we can do as fans at this point? I know we don't have much power, but can we come together in some way? Is there anything in the works like that? To try and have some influence.
There are people spreading popular petitions around, but I don't know if I would put much faith in that process. I think the better process is to use the platform that we have to share our differing views. And over at theonering.net, we have other staff writers besides me who do have differing opinions about this. And I would very, very much like to publish other writers and other scholars, anybody from around the world who would like to come and share their opinions. And that way we make our voices known. The best thing that we can do is say way up front, as loud as we can, that maybe we're jumping the gun, maybe we are a little bit, biting off things early because, we don't know for sure what they're doing yet.
Mm-hmm.
But at least now we're raising the alarm that there's a right way and a wrong way that we expect it to be done.
Yep.
It looks like they're looking at data points and clicks. They're looking at what are people clicking on Amazon in terms of merchandise. They're looking at what they're clicking on to watch in terms of renting movies and shows. They're looking at the data. And instead of looking at the bloody data, which is what caused Netflix to cancel The Dark Crystal, instead they should look at the hearts and minds of the people who are actually consuming this product.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be so concerned with doing a matrix of how many points and clicks we have on different products or Funko Pops or, really. And that is what they're looking at as a system. You cannot build a system of handling this type of a property based on cold data. This type of a property is different. It is multi-generational. It is built in with a completely different sensibility. And like I said earlier, if you're going to make something which is so off base, then you're going to lose that forever quality where people would always put the Lord of the Rings or the Hobbit movies on in the background, comfort food. How many times readings on struggling mental health issues and they're struggling.
Okay, here we go. Is he still there? Clifford, are you there? Can you hear us?
That's hopeful.
Hello. Hi. Are we back?
We got him back.
Oh, we're back. Hi.
I think the internet problem's on our side, so sorry about that.
No, that's okay. That's totally okay. I was just saying that, and I don't know where I was. I don't know where we lost the cut. Your video froze too.
Yeah. So I think. Do you remember the last thing you remember saying?
We were talking about, or we're just talking about how to have an influence.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Not to put a bunch, not to put stock in the popular petitions, but to just use the platforms that we have. Yeah.
I think the greater wisdom is for Amazon to pay attention to what we're saying as a fandom. And there's a lot of forums for us to do this. And it just happens that ours is one of the biggest ones at OneRing.net. Instead of looking at number crunching, Amazon should not be looking at data and how many clicks and points and clicks we have for products and things. That is not a matrix for how to handle the Tolkien properties, the legendarium of Middle-earth. That is something they should approach by listening to the hearts and the minds of all of us, the fans. And we're all out there with a lot of different opinions. Everybody has a voice about representation. People have a voice about how they want this to look and how they want Middle-earth to be. That's what they need to do. They need to. The studios need to listen to the fans instead of looking at data crunching. And they're just trying to compare ratings numbers. It's unfortunate. I also mentioned Netflix was only looking at their number crunching, and that caused them to lose faith in the Dark Crystal, and they didn't renew the Age of Resistance again. But you can't look at number crunching and say that is the end of that creative effort. That's not how Tolkien fans work.
Exactly. And that's not how Tolkien worked either, right? I mean, I feel like that in and of itself goes against his methodology in every sense of the word.
It's the most possible, I can only imagine that he would have described that as orcish thinking or something like that, right?
Very.
It was anybody who has spent time with Tolkien and trying to understand his philosophy of the world and of reality would have quickly recognized that he would have just rejected everything about that sort of thinking. He probably would have been kind of like, I suppose it's inevitable, but I reject it. But I reject it nevertheless. I have to agree with you on the Dark Crystal. By the way, I loved that show, the season they did of that on Netflix, and was I remember seeing that when I was very young when that movie came out. I remember seeing it, loving it as a child, and then in the Netflix show I watched it and was very, very impressed by it. And I have to say, I think they struck a very Tolkienian tone with the darkness of it. Right? It was pretty dark. I was shocked by some of the things that happened in the first few episodes, but again, it wasn't dark. It wasn't maybe prurient, or it wasn't any of these things that we've been talking about as saying we don't want to see in Tolkien. It was the right kind of dark. It was the dark that still shakes you to your core, right?
But it wasn't prurient. Yes, exactly. Great word. Yeah.
Well, it's a word it's a word you used in your article, and I had to look it up.
Yes, I know. I love that word. I would also offer that Professor Tolkien and his works improve our lives and has
Absolutely.
bettered our lives. A lot of people turn to Tolkien to deal with their depression, to deal with their alcoholism, to deal with, mundane things that might seem mundane to you. But to these people, they put in the Blu-ray as comfort food. And they pick up and read The Hobbit and read The Lord of the Rings, because when King when Theoden says to his niece, "No more despair," it is incredibly powerful. This is the energy that makes moms and dads read these books to their little ones when they're babies. And why would you share books with your children? Well, if you're going to play with the intellectual property and make it something that is really not what it is, then you're going to lose forever that connecting chain to a generational link, because people will not put your show on for comfort food.
Right.
Yeah.
Amazon, that's what I'm telling you. I've been reading a lot about mental health and trying to support some of my friends and loved ones who are dealing with mental health issues. And I have interviewed so many people in my journey across this earth. A lot of good people I interviewed for my movie and for, discussions with fans at the One Ring. And they have said things like, "I've been struggling with my weight," or "I have been struggling with my son because my son has Down syndrome," or something else. And people have always come to me and described the therapeutic effects of Tolkien.
Yeah.
And that cannot be underestimated here. If you're going to make a billion-dollar franchise that's going to be on TV for years and years and years, and you're not taking seriously the stewardship of that intellectual property, and you're not even thinking about the way it helps people, then you're not the person for the job. You might as well give that job to somebody else who's going to be more mindful of Professor Tolkien's idiom, his world building, and his intentions.
Absolutely.
Really, I'm sorry to be that way, but maybe I'm not sorry.
No, you should not be sorry.
I mean, you nailed it, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
for me, like my own story of just like what Tolkien has meant for me on a very deep level in some very dark times. And we're fans of his. We're these rabid fans of his, right, Clifford? Not because like, it not just because, oh, these are really nice and fun stories and all of the cosplay and all that kind of stuff, right? It's like, because these things get you right in the deepness of your soul, right? These stories get you way down deep, and they say these profound things, and they help you come to grips with your own reality and your own existence. And
totally.
And it's done that for probably millions of people,
Absolutely. I feel that. I feel that, and I sense that when I watch those YouTube videos that say, "Oh, I'm showing Lord of the Rings to my mom for the first time. She's never seen it." And even though they're not talking about reading the book, they're talking about the effectiveness of Peter Jackson making a great adaptation of the book. And when I watch those videos, the woman goes from cynical to, "Oh, this is so tedious. Are you going to make me sit through 3 hours of this?" And then the next movie, she's completely gripped and can't catch her breath while she's watching. And at the end of the third movie, his mom is crying. And she's literally in tears at the scene where Frodo says, "I'm not staying here anymore. This wound is too much for me. I'm leaving forever." And then you realize that's the price you paid. That is the price you paid to fight for the good of this earth. And you are forever wounded, but you did the right thing. But now there's peace. You get a chance to have peace in the end because you did the right thing. And that touches people so profoundly, more than, a young, quote unquote, a young Galadriel having, a skinny dipping session with Anatar because she doesn't know that he's Sauron. Okay. So I got nothing else to say.
You said it all.
And the only thing, and I think this kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of the episode. I know for John, the Peter Jackson movies were kind of what led him to read the books, right? I mean, they've been the gateway for many, many people. into reading the books and into the world of Tolkien. And it's scary to think about the fact that this Lord of the Rings on Prime could be that for a younger generation. You know, that's what they're going to be exposed to, possibly even before they see the movies.
Well, it's hopeful to think that they're going to be, a new generation could be introduced to it that way, but it's sad to think that they might get the wrong impression.
But that's what I mean. That's what I mean. That it would, that's the introduction they would get. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, thank you, Greta. Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you on that. It's it goes back to the John Borman thing, where my dad took my brother and I to see Excalibur, and he did not know it was behind that R rating. But I tell you what, I have recently been reading the script, the Lord of the Rings script that John Borman wrote, that he did not make, and oh my gosh, you have no idea. Yeah. Oh yeah. John Borman was working for a couple of years in development with United Artists, and it didn't happen. And United Artists took the project to Ralph Bakshi instead, because Mr. Bakshi came into the room and said, "I can do it for cheaper, and I can make it look even better with this rotoscoping animation, and it'll look like it'll be that level of surreal, which animation can provide. Animation can give you that level of surreality to get you into that gateway moment into this fantasy world, because it's the way the brain works with absorbing the animated image." And so United Artists said, okay, and they scrapped the entire John Borman script, and thank goodness they did, because the John Borman script is something I'm going to write another article about, and it provides the most concrete example of how things can go wrong. And it was almost foisted upon us. We're talking about stuff that will curl your toes. You have
Is this the one that is this the one that Tolkien reacted to in one of his letters? Like when he had did he have a chance?
No.
Is this a later one? Okay.
That was a much, much later one that was worked on when Professor Tolkien was near the very closing months of his life.
Okay. All
right. Because he also died in Professor Tolkien died, I believe, in 1977, or was it 73? I'll have to look that up.
It was 73.
Yeah, I know, 73.
77. He died in 73. Yeah.
I was thinking of the publication of Silmarillion, right?
I get those two mixed up in my head for some reason.
Thank you, but no. The one that you were mentioning was the Zimmerman script that Forrest Ackerman, who created Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. He was the guy who went to visit England with Zimmerman's script that Professor Tolkien did not like at all. I was one of the last people to interview Forrest Ackerman before he passed. And so we have his interview in our documentary. Everybody was ahead of their time in trying to approach Tolkien. And so we had to wait until 1978 when Ralph Bakshi did his version. And but that was only half the story. And Ralph got ripped off by United Artists, who did not tell him that they were never going to produce part 2, and they wouldn't even put part 1 on the film that they released. And they wouldn't allow the marketing materials to say, this is part 1 of 2. They wouldn't allow that. So he got screwed over pretty badly. But then again, we wait until the year 2001, and then the unthinkable happened. A little independent zombie film director who makes splatter films and uses a lawnmower to chop up lots of zombies, all of a sudden he's being given the reins to Middle Earth. And back at that time, we were all shocked. We were just as anxious then as we are now. So maybe this is kind of like a cycle that's happening all over again.
But maybe we're but maybe then again we're going to look back and be like, man, I really wish that Peter Jackson had just done this himself, and been the one to take this on, for all the things we might, we as the, hardcore fans might complain about details here and there, like what he did was much more faithful to Tolkien's world and Tolkien's reality than this show wound up being. But we can't get ahead of ourselves either and just be like, well, it's automatically going to be a disaster, because we want to be fair that it's going to be that they're going to do the right thing, that they're going to spend the time to really understand how this should be. But unfortunately, we just don't know anything right now.
Like we're left to speculation.
That's where we're at,
Well, we're at the point where there's a glimmer of hope that they're making a pilot, and this pilot is going to go for review. It will be reviewed by the Tolkien estate, the family. It allegedly, I'm hearing that it'll be reviewed by Jeff Bezos, Mr. Lex Luthor himself, and it will be sorry, and
all good.
they're also they're gonna make this pilot and see what works and then what doesn't work, and then after they figure out what works and doesn't, they're gonna retool the material and go back into production and start working on other episodes. So we have yet to see. There's going to be some blowback from internal, but we don't know what. It's probably not going to be on our TV screens until 2022.
Yeah,
it's definitely not going to be 2021. We will not see any of this. So we're left with another long period of time without Amazon Studios doing any type of liaison with us. So we're still going to be doing our thing, speculating, reporting the rumors, and reporting the facts. And that's the best we can do.
Well, and just on the off chance that Jeff Bezos ever listens to this, I just want to say, Jeff, we want to think of you more as Superman, right? Than
yes, we do.
Like Luthor, right? We want to be able, when this thing comes out, to be like, Jeff Bezos is Superman. He accomplished the thing that we never thought we'd see happen. And
I would love that. I would love that you say that. Hey,
you know?
Do you know what? I heard that this got picked up in the first place because Jeff Bezos is a Ringer fan and he loves Lord of the Rings like we do.
Yeah.
So great, and that's great. That's a good start.
Yeah.
So hopefully he's gonna be some quality control himself.
Yeah. And you gave me some peace of mind too, Clifford, when just in your talk about the intimacy coordinator's role. That doesn't seem to be as much of a red flag as I initially was afraid it might be. Like, it seems like that could be, that it's a good thing that they have one. Now, what we need to, what the concern is obviously what her exact role or the scope of her role is going to be on the show. But just the fact, I was very woeful over the fact that they had one, but
at least they didn't have to hire multiple intimacy coordinators.
So far it's just one.
Just one, fair enough.
Intimacy department. We got a whole department on this show.
A whole department.
Fair enough.
She is only the head. Yes.
Thank you, Greta. Yeah, I totally appreciate that. I like the fact that they're doing it the right way and they're getting unnecessary people off the soundstage. Anybody who's like visitors on the set who might be some creepers. Well, they don't need to be there.
Right.
Get them out of the soundstage so that the actresses and the actors can clear their heads and do what they need to do. I appreciate that. I really appreciate that.
In this day and age, it's a necessity. Yeah.
Yeah. And on the other hand, we really don't know what type of sexual depictions would possibly be necessary. And at least we're having the open conversation with an open mind and with open ears. We can talk with one another about what we expect, what we like and don't like about Tolkien, and they're going to have to pick up on this. They're paying a bunch of people a lot of money to read and monitor what we're discussing online, and it's part of their publicity machine. So we know that they're listening, and that's that. As Gandalf would say, that is an encouraging thought.
That is an encouraging thought. For sure.
Well, I think this has been an amazing conversation, Clifford. I have enjoyed the heck out of this.
Same.
I definitely want to do something like this again. Maybe as more news comes our way, and I hope we can make you repeat a guest on our podcast.
Yeah, we would love that. Yeah, for sure.
This has been just great.
Yeah, it has been.
Kind.
And I wanted to ask one quick question as we wrap up. The very last thing you covered in your article, Clifford, was about the Tolkien estate's role, how much influence they have. Do they have veto power? I think is what
that's
you're talking
really,
about.
really important. I'm glad you mentioned that, my friends. We don't know for sure how much influence they have, but they do have enough influence to say no to something, because Tom Shippey told us a long time ago that they cannot violate the absolute constructs of chronology. So they don't have final script approval. There's no studio on earth who would give the family estate final checkmark approval on a script. That doesn't happen. But we know that they've got some influence to say, we're going to put the brakes on this because it's not right. Don't know how far that goes. And Amazon has spent so much money on this, they don't want to mess it up. And that maybe that's another thing to be hopeful about. Hopefully they don't want to mess it up. They want this to be a success. And if we can say, hey, we were premature in getting a little anxious and scared about what you were doing with nudity, then that's all the better that we opened up the conversation anyways. Even if we are having, even if we're having too big of a reaction right now, it really is not too much because we're aware. We're eyes, minds are open now.
And they know that we're watching.
Yeah, I'm using American Sign Language now.
Yes.
Yeah. So if we can open up their listening, that's all we can do is try to. And hey, they're big and corporate. This is a massive corporate thing. We don't know yet how to open their listening, so that's why we're trying it this way to have these conversations.
Hey, maybe at the end of the day, some of this stuff leaking is they're actually trying to kind of feel it out, right? And be like, what can we do? What can we do?
That thought
what
kind
are
of
our
crossed my
guardrails
mind.
from a fan's perspective?
Yeah, that did cross my mind. Are we being played a little bit here? Like, are they, are they just kind of toying with us and being like, let's do this and see how they react, and maybe we'll do this. And,
I'm sure that they're just excited to be able to get past COVID and get anything caught on film.
For sure.
I'm also told that Weta Workshop has boots on the ground, and those are the people who come up with their paintbrush and they do this to your armor, and they go brush, and they brush all the rust or painted blood to do all those details on your wig, costumes. And those people are not working on original designs that Weta did from previous films. They're working on new designs from the new department. But at least we do have some familiar craftspeople who are, doing the work on the ground, who had worked on previous 6 films. I am told that you're not allowed to talk about Peter Jackson. You're not allowed to mention the New Line Cinema movies. And, his name is persona non grata in the production hallways. But okay, maybe they just want to strike out and they want to make something fresh, something new with their own new spin on it. And you know what? That's fine too.
I can appreciate that too. If that's what that's all about, just wanting to kind of not feel like they're tied to his adaptations and his depiction. But
exactly. Right. Clifford, did you say that you've been reading? You've had read some rumors about what's in the scripts, or have you?
I've been hearing all kinds of ugliness about what's in the script.
Okay, so it's not positive. Okay.
I'm hearing stuff like Galadriel and somebody are crash landed and shipwrecked on the shore somewhere on their way to Numenor, and then they just get stuck together and a quote-unquote relationship develops. And the person who told me this rumor, I said, if it's not Celeborn, then I don't want to hear it.
Right?
That's right.
Amen.
Unfinished tales coming in.
For sure.
So,
For sure.
And I keep digging into my books to make sure I'm prepared for these conversations that are coming my way. So,
yes, you should.
Trying to do this. This has been such a generous and beautiful conversation. You guys are so awesome to take time. Well, thank you for your time. My God.
Our pleasure. I mean, this has been awesome. It's been really, really awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Clifford, thanks again. And for all the listeners, make sure if you're not already following Clifford, he is at QuickBeam2000 on Twitter and Instagram, correct?
And I'm the host on every Tuesday's live stream. When you're wondering what to do on a Tuesday afternoon, we do the OneRing.net, which our playful acronym is Torn. And you can watch our Torn Tuesdays show on any given Tuesday. And pretty soon, when the COVID restrictions are lifted in Los Angeles, we will be broadcasting again from the Scum and Villainy Cantina down in Hollywood, which is the famous inspired destination from a galaxy far, far away.
Oh, nice. Very cool.
That's the place where Kevin Smith does his show.
Oh, okay.
His Fat Man on Batman show.
Yeah.
And that's usually where I'm used to broadcasting. But pretty soon we'll be back on the air. Instead of looking at my living room, we'll be back on the air at the tavern, at the cantina rather. So that'll be fun.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, you know what? There's some possible good news. I heard a rumor that Howard Shore was being approached by Amazon Studios, and I heard that Howard is not interested in coming on board to do all of the score for the show, but he's interested in talking about, maybe doing a theme, or maybe he'll do an opening title bit.
Uh-huh.
And that suddenly reminds me of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Their opening title was the Jerry Goldsmith score from a previous film.
Yeah.
So maybe Amazon is going to work out something with Howard. Well, they'll get some of his themes and use it as a drop, needle drop at the opening title of the show. So the more stuff we hear, we're going to bring the news to you as much as we can.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Sounds great.
All right.
That is awesome.
Well, thanks so much, Clifford.
Yes, thank you, Clifford.
Thank you guys for everything, and many blessings to all of you. I appreciate you very much.
We appreciate you. Yeah, this has been really fantastic.
Absolutely.
I'd be glad to come back soon.
Okay.
Well, great.
We'll
definitely plan on it. So we'll be in touch.
For sure. All right.
Thank you, John and Greta.
Yeah, take care.
Take care.
Cheers. Thank you.